Our next session comes from the creative and media agency Brains, behind the much-fated John Lewis advertising. Their Christmas TV commercials have, of course, captured the nation's hearts, and the campaign has been showered with awards, including the Top Effectiveness Awards, and most notably the Grand Prix from the IPA. But there's an untold story here, and that's the influence of newspapers in its success. What Tim and James are going to share with us is why John Lewis spends as much money on print and digital newspaper advertising as it does on television. That's about 40% each. And how this has had a direct influence on the John Lewis success story. Why, in their case, do television and newspapers work so well as a combination? There are clearly lessons here for advertisers in retail and beyond. I'm delighted to hand over now to Tim Pearson of Manning Gottlieb OMD and James Murphy of adam&eveDDB, who incidentally was recently named by the Sunday Times as one of the most influential people in the UK, partly, I think, on the back of this campaign. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Rufus. Good afternoon. We're just going to spend the next 15 minutes or so briefly talking you through the story of John Lewis and its relationships with Newsbrands. And this is probably the first time ever that I've presented before James in a presentation. Normally creative goes first, media goes afterwards. So Martin's right, things are clearly changing. The relationship with Newsbrands is an interesting one. We use news to influence, to inform, to inspire and to educate. And we hadn't really told this story before. Firstly, because nobody's really asked us to until this point. But also because there is another story that Rufus touched on, which is the story that tends to steal all of the limelight when it comes to John Lewis's marketing. And by the way, we're not after any limelight. And that's the story of TV. And, excuse me. And I'm sure you're all aware of the amazing and fantastic work that James and his team do at Adam and Eve, creating beautifully emotional advertising that's probably made a few of you cry at some point over the last couple of years. But there is more to the story than that. There is a lot more to the story than the work that happens on TV. And in truth, we're only on TV once or possibly twice in a year. But I think the perception is that John Lewis are a brand that are in TV month after month, week after week, and week after week, and so on. But that's not actually true. And I think Newsbrands are actually as important to John Lewis as TV is, because it's a big brand active in a number of different categories, reaching out to a number of different audiences. And the TV is used mostly to engage emotionally and to build a deeper emotional affinity with John Lewis and his customers. But a brand like John Lewis has to do more than that in its comms. And that's where Newsbrands are very important, and I think the unsung hero, actually, of John Lewis communications. So we'll just bounce through a very quick overview of some of the work that we've done today to show you how we use Newsbrands. We're not saying it's the only way to do it, we're just saying it's the way that we do it. But before I do that, I'll just throw a couple of interesting stats at you. First of all, we are active, as I said, 52 weeks of the year. We are in the trenches, fighting the fight alongside other retail brands and other retail categories all year long. Our news spend, the quote, the number that Rufus just gave you there was actually wrong, but I don't mean to correct you, Rufus, in front of everyone. But we spend double the amount, or we invest, should I say, double the amount of money into Newsbrands than we do in TV, which I think is a remarkable stat, and a stat that a number of people are always very, very surprised by. Our investment into news is actually up significantly, over 20% last year it was up. Again, I think the perception is that a brand like John Lewis may be investing less into news, and that's not actually true. And in fact, our investment has doubled in news since 2010. And that's partly down to the fact that for every pound that we invest into news, we deliver over £4 of profit back to the partnership. So that's one of the reasons why investment has been on the up, and that's one of the reasons why we use Newsbrands confidently in our communications. And this isn't all by chance. It's largely due to the fact that Newsbrands provide us with this fantastic toolbox that we can use to respond to different briefs and different challenges for John Lewis. And I'll pass you over to James now, and he'll talk you through some of the work that we've done.
Thank you. So the importance of print and digital channels, the channels that Newsbrands allow us to have access to, can't be underestimated. And there's a very, very simple reason for this for John Lewis, because John Lewis is a very unique business, and it's very, very layered. And I know that, having worked with all kinds of clients in different sectors, clients love to kind of, create these constructions for their brands, kind of, brand onion and so on, with all of its layers. And you can get brand onions for all sorts of unlikely things. You can be selling soap on a rope or baked beans, and someone will come up with an incredibly complex brand model with all of these layers. In the case of John Lewis, it's actually true, because you've got a business that not only has been around for a long time, but it's very, very multidimensional, and there are all sorts of things that are special about it. For a start, they have up to 350,000 SKUs. That's a huge number of products. It's actually more products in more areas than any other general merchandiser in the UK. The other thing is obviously the unique business and ownership model that they have, and some of the knock-ons that has on the way that they do business. There are then other layers of the business about price matching and being known undersold, things like guarantees and warranties, and the fact that their partnership model means that staff are true experts. They stay a lot longer, they're deeply loyal to the partnership, they become experts in their field. So there are all of these stories to tell on different layers, and so I think what I'm going to do very, very quickly is just peel off some of the layers of that onion and show you how the partnerships that we have with Newsbrands allow us to reveal the different aspects of John Lewis. And first of all is just really to look at, there's probably a spectrum, and it's interesting because we don't plan our work like this. This is total post-rationalisation. This is actually standing back and looking at all of the things that we do and thinking, okay, there is a spectrum that emerges, because it's a business that, despite the fact we only do a TV campaign once or perhaps twice a year, it's actually advertising 24 hours a day, and it may not be 365, it's definitely 364 days a year. So it's always on, and it's mainly always on through Newsbrands and print and online. And the spectrum that we work across through print and online can be surprisingly emotional at one end. That's not just the role of broadcast and TV in the kind of old cliched view. And then it moves all the way down. Oh, am I not audible? Hello?
Did anyone hear any of that? Really
Can you hear that? Is that all right? Okay. Yeah. So the way that most people would probably see someone like John Lewis operating is down at that end, which is a classic retailer model where you're doing your emotional work on TV, perhaps a little bit on radio, and you're banging out price and line advertising in print and online down at the rational end of the spectrum. But it's a really rich spectrum when it comes to John Lewis and their involvement with print, online, and Newsbrands. And first up is, at the emotional end, is inspiration. And because we use a strand of inspirational work to showcase the best of the assortment in this vast business with all of these products. And we deliberately home in on the most inspirational and aspirational merchandise and showcase that. It may not be available in all stores. It's normally available online in some of the flagship stores. But it's very deliberately the use of things like print and online to drive reappraisal, to get people to sit up and go, I didn't think that, I didn't know they stocked that, and to drive visits in terms of footfall and visits online as a result. Some examples, women's wear fashion campaigns where we're actually deliberately choosing garments and items that are right at the front end of really what John Lewis offer, using surprising models, photographers to capture that work, and then using digital in a way that brings that stuff to life. And this is obviously Vogue, but these kind of interactive elements are done through other Newsbrands as well. And you've got here where we're able to echo a print campaign through online by creating what we grandly called Climatic targeted banners, which were banners, believe it or not, when you logged into this, it can tell what the weather's like, where you're logging in from, and the carousel serves you up the garment at the front that's related to the weather in your locality. But also, you can go straight through to the website and shop. You can click on things you like, share them through your social media channels. And so it's very simple. It's a piece of advertising, but it's properly interactive. And it shows you the way that we can use the kind of breadth that Newsbrands offers us to bring campaigns to life. But equally, it's not just fashion, it's things like home design. This is a highly important, very important area for margin for a business, any general merchandiser. And again, we're deliberately creating campaigns here where these are created for newspapers and magazines, but funnily enough, these then become visual merchandising mechanics that we use in store and in windows, as well as online. And then the next layer along that emotional to rational spectrum is surprise. So this is actually taking key seasonal looks and themes, particularly in fashion and sometimes in homewares, and actually unpacking those for customers in a way saying, okay, if this is something you've seen in fashion magazines or something you've seen on the catwalk, this is the way that we're going to bring it to a John Lewis customer. And again, it's using the media for what it's good at, something we wouldn't be able to use broadcast channels for, because we can take key looks and then show the customer how they can make, not just buy that look, but they can make that look by accessorizing it and shopping across the breadth of the assortment. So here you can see this is something that was done for the recent Alice Templey partnership called Somerset, where we're taking a key look, but we're showing how you can make the look with other accessories. And because of the nature of this media, it allows the audience to dwell on it, to look at it, to get ideas. They may go into the shop, or they may go straight online and shop them. Again, I'm reliably informed that clashing florals is a key theme at the moment, and this is how you'd accessorize that look. So, and again, how do we then use those partnerships to deepen this content online? So we have things like behind-the-scenes films that we run, not just on johnlewis.com, but embedded in editorial as well.
Bits from the store. The idea of this is that the stylist kind of comes in and curates this collection from Somerset, puts all the best bits together into these kind of complete outfits.
I'm not going to dwell on that because you know how those things unfold. You see the photographer and the stylist and all of that kind of thing. And but it's just giving it that bit more texture. And what's interesting is that actually having these kind of layers of channels allows us to expand on these product stories in a very, very cost-effective way. We couldn't go anywhere near more traditional broadcast media with that kind of message because we just couldn't afford the airtime or the actual length of production. And again, even just going through to display online as well. And really, this is just cataloguing online, but trying to do something that catches people's eye and brings them through to the website. I think again, just like the previous section, it isn't just about fashion, it's also about homewares and so on. And again, when we get behind these collections, so for example, Cookshop, and big partnerships with people like the Evening Standard and so on, and you can almost see within hours the footfall going up in stores and these products being sought out by customers. So it works, and it is just as reactive as any of the big broadcast channels that we're using. Again, more homewares there. And this is interesting as well, where I suppose one of the things that's made it possible to increase our partnerships with print and media owners is actually the fact that as overall this marketing campaign has become more successful, a lot of suppliers have wanted to become involved in it. So what we've actually been able to create is a model of advertising where you're effectively doing brand ads that position the fact that we now have a bigger beauty offer than you'd ever expect, but they're underpinned by supplier funding. So one of these will run, and then it will have a supplier-funded piece of copy immediately following it. So, and that model's proven to work very, very well. So after inspiration and surprise, there's also delight. And this is about unpacking the next layer of that John Lewis model, which is explaining the John Lewis difference. Very strongly, this is often around never knowingly undersold, because it's not just a price promise, it's about service and quality of products as well. And again, these are sort of quite nuanced and sometimes detailed stories that we need to be able to tell in media where people have more dwell time. And it might be things about click and collect. This has been an extraordinary success for John Lewis, a major lever in taking their business forward. And we're able to explain it through channels like digital and print and get people to react. Again, price matching and never knowingly undersold as well. And then even at Christmas, the idea of actually delighting people by saying, okay, you may have seen one of the big spots that we've done on TV, but actually able to use Newsbrands as channels and say, okay, how do we remind people of that? And then very simply just get them to click through and go. I mean, this Christmas, something like 900,000 visits through to johnlewis.com came through interactions with this kind of marketing. So that has a huge and very, very direct commercial effect. The next layer, as we travel down the emotional to rational spectrum, is reassurance. And this is actually proving to customers in a very, very aggressive market. You know, let's face it, we probably have the most feisty and aggressive high street anywhere in the world, but proof points of the true value that John Lewis offers. And this is not just around price, but around guarantees and expertise and quality, because what's surprising in the current, well, in the last few years before the economy started to look more buoyant, is that John Lewis has had a robust business in a time when consumers have been challenged, because I think people have wanted to buy well, and this has been a very important strand in us convincing people that they're buying well at John Lewis. So things about guarantees on electricals lasting 2 years. You can buy cheaper at, you know, Currys, that kind of thing, but you won't get the guarantees. Or 5 years on TV. And then again with those partnerships, just simply using those strong, very kind of tactical graphics just to bring them to life in what I think can be really, really standout work in partnerships with newspaper and news brands. So then looking also at trading, and this is probably the biggest and most busy strand of what we deliver in newsprint. And this is why, despite the fact that we may do 1 or maximum 2 TV campaigns a year, there is a large and very busy team in the creative agency working the whole time, churning out copy for online and print. Because there is a large amount of supplier funding, probably nowhere more so than in electrical home technology. And you can get on the tube of an evening, open the Standard, and you might see an ad about 5-year guarantees, and then you'll see 2 very quickly following fractional ads that are supplier funded about electrical products. So it's not just 24/7 and 364 days a year, it's several times every day in the same publication sometimes. And but it pays, and believe you me, it's monitored to see that it pays. And it's also about key clearance and sale times. So again, these provide a very, very strong platform for suppliers to fund the work. And again, we move through to key times of the year. John Lewis doesn't have a sale, it has a clearance, much more tasteful and middle class. And it's all about more of what you love for less, and as you can see there. And we bring that to life online as well. I suppose, I'm going to have to wrap up quickly, but down at the far end, the far rational and tactical end of that spectrum, is where I think it does get interesting, because when you look at the perception that perhaps is created by all of this marketing work, all of this multi-channel campaigning, people go, oh, lovely John Lewis, you know, it's very, you know, it's really, I trust them and they're fantastic, they really care and so on. And they do. It's a phenomenal business and a very, very unique business. But they are prepared to compete just as hard as any other retailers because we are on that very, very competitive high street. And one of the things that I really like, one of the great things that OMD do is that, you know, if we hear that House of Fraser or Debenhams are going to have a sale or a big event, then we will get copy out there, and they will have page 7 on the right-hand side, and we'll have page 9 with one of those, so that the moment they announce a sale, well, we're having a sale as well, because we're never knowingly undersold. So, and I think what's interesting about this, it all has a strong kind of brand tonality and handwriting, but fine, we're being quite emotional and quite fluffy up at one end, and we're being fairly tough and fighting it out on the street alongside the other retailers down at the other end. But what this array of media channels and these partnerships with Newsbrands allows us to do is to kind of control that conversation and deliver it appropriately through those different channels with different levels of tonality and different levels of detail as well. So really, just to sum that up, what I think is interesting about this is really just a chart that we put together to show, for example, the spectrum of work that's done. The stuff at the top is various TV ads that, as I said, might happen once or twice a year. Down at the bottom, we've got windows and visual merchandising and actual merchandising itself and e-books and things like that. The vast array of activity here across all of these things, fashion, beauty, home, electrical, store openings, clearances, supplier funding and so on. This is all print, online, it's Newsbrands territory. This is the backbone of what's being done to actually drive this large and quite layered business forward.
Thank you. We're acutely aware that the John Lewis audience is changing its relationship with Newsbrands, particularly the younger end of their audience. So this is the picture of the guy behind me here is a guy called Danny. He is a John Lewis shopper. It's a real picture of him. I didn't just get that off Google Images. And he is young, lives in an urban environment, obviously. He has money in his pocket. He's fashion conscious. He's design conscious. He's a cool guy, like many of you in the room, I can see here. And he's very, very interested in technology. And we see this coming through in the sales of John Lewis. So, for example, at Christmas, John Lewis was selling an iPad every 10 seconds in the lead up to Christmas. So, very, very tech-savvy audience that they're communicating to here. And these guys have a changing relationship with Newsbrands. It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you that this group, the readership of traditional news is down 7% year on year. But they are twice as likely to buy a newspaper via an app. And news app ownership now outstrips print readership. So we monitored this stuff regularly to keep an eye on this audience because we have to evolve and we have to change and we have to stay in front of them. And they are twice as likely to pay for online content. So that means that the way, as I said, the way we're behaving changes. We're spending a lot more in digital within Newsbrands. We're spending a lot more within apps. Increasingly, we're looking towards more native style advertising. We've done some great work with The Guardian in this space, taking the Guardian fashion brand and the John Lewis fashion brand and bringing those together with some online video content that our consumers are choosing to watch. They're seeking this stuff out. So I think you'll start to see a lot more activity in this space, in the native space, and also us partnering up more and more with media owners who have access to talent and data and product and so on. And the effectiveness of all this is increasing. So I guess today is about influence. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is make John Lewis commercially successful, and Newsbrands are absolutely helping us with that. The first headline here is that my PowerPoint is amazing. The second headline is that Newsbrands are a significant volume driver with a very healthy ROI. The ROI effectiveness of Newsbrands is actually up year on year. It's not in decline, it's increasing. And our TV and video activity actually increases the effectiveness of print. So we don't look at these channels in competition, as James said, we use them together. And if we use them together, they become much more powerful. And we know that print becomes more effective when activated with two other channels. I won't say what the two other channels are now because I don't want 300 calls from media owners this afternoon. But we know what those two other channels are. So we want to do more digitally, but some things get in the way. And there are three things that tend to get in the way of us doing more, particularly within apps. The first one is that we need to hit a tipping point. Some of the numbers still feel a little bit small. The investment can seem a little bit high in terms of money and time and effort. So the industry needs to get to a point where the numbers are bigger here, and all of the investment therefore becomes more worthwhile. The second thing that gets in the way is the level of transparency and data that exists within Newsbrands. We obviously work with a number of pure play online publishers, and they have a whole load more data, and they're much more transparent with that data. So I think Newsbrands have a little bit of catching up to do in that space, but undoubtedly that's coming. And finally, there is definitely more opportunity for more rich more shoppable formats, particularly within apps. So we're very excited about where the digital landscape is moving to, and because John Lewis engaged with a very young audience now, that's hugely important to us that we take advantage of that. And you're going to wrap up, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I think in conclusion, it is that perhaps surprising fact that Newsbrands are the single biggest investment in media for John Lewis, and I think that we have what I would like to think is a grown-up view of this, that we can deliver a huge spectrum of types of messages and tonality across those digital and print channels. And yep, we do plenty of hard trading, but we also build the brand and we reveal more and more of the brand through those channels. Click on I think again one of the other things about John Lewis is they monitor what's done and how well it works very, very closely, and it's very clear that the ROI is increasing. But actually, the way to really optimize it is to blend those channels and get that blended effect. And I think that one of the things is that what we're all trying to do is to keep up with how our customers are changing, and actually work out the best ways of really driving that joined up customer journey. As we've got customers' habits changing at one end, we've got technology on the shop floor and around the shop floor, things like click and collect, where suddenly you can shop John Lewis online but pick up stuff at Waitrose or any post office, things like that. The pattern of behaviour is changing dramatically, and we need to bear that in mind. And as we're innovating to keep up with and keep ahead of all of that, the role of content is more important. We're trying to reveal these stories in more depth, in more ways, try and create a relationship with shoppers that is more always on. And I don't just mean advertising every day of the year, but giving people access to more and more richer content more often. I think there's no limit to our imaginations, and actually the technical ambition of some of the people that work in our agencies, but it's also about the partnership that we have with the Newsbrands and the people who can get us onto those digital and print channels. And it's about making sure that we can get great ideas out into market as fast as possible, not least because we want to have as many firsts as possible. So thank you very much.
That's it. Thank you.